Good afternoon, everyone. We do still have some people filtering in to join this afternoon's webinar, but we've got a lot to get through, so we might get started now. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And just a note that today's webinar is being recorded, so just be aware of that. All right. We're here today to discuss the Capacity Investment Scheme, or you'll hear it referred to as the CIS throughout the webinar, 10 to 2, which focuses on delivery of clean dispatchable capacity across the Western Australian wholesale electricity market. I'm joining you from Wongal Land, which is part of the Eora Nation in Sydney's inner west. So before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands and sea across Australia and the traditional owners of the lands on where we're all joining from today. I acknowledge their enduring connection to land, sea, air and sky, and I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to any Aboriginal people on the call today. So before we begin, we'll just do a bit of a disclaimer and some housekeeping. Just to introduce myself, my name is Fiona Thompson and I am an independent facilitator from RPS. I'm here to assist today with moderating the webinar and with the Q&A section that we'll have after the formal presentation. So as you know, we are here to talk about 10 to 2 of the Capacity Investment Scheme for Western Australia. And as I mentioned earlier, you will hear it referred to as the CIS or the scheme by some of the presenters today. So 10 to 2 of the CIS focuses on increasing dispatchable capacity across the Western Australian wholesale electricity market. You'll hear it referred to as the WEM or WEM by some of the presenters today. And up on the screen, you will see a disclaimer. You can read this in your own time, but I did want to draw your attention to it. The webinar is part of a tender process in relation to the scheme, and that means it's part of an ongoing formal process. So any and all of the final terms and conditions are set out in the relevant tender guidelines, just for your awareness. A few quick points as well that you'll see up on the screen today. You've joined a Teams webinar call, so your microphone and your camera should automatically be off. And we just ask that everyone please remain muted and with their cameras off for the duration of the webinar. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are also recording today's webinar and we'll publish it on the AEMO Services website in the coming days. So today we will be taking questions through Slido. And if you'd like to ask a question, you can visit sli.do or slido.com and use the code on the screen, which is number 1291746. There's also a QR code on the screen that will take you directly to today's event. You may notice a delay in between when you type your question and when it appears in the questions box, and this is normal. There's no need to ask the same question again. You can also mark yourself as anonymous if you would prefer your name not appear in the Q&A channel. Because of the large size of the group, we will be moderating the questions today. Just because we've got so many people on the call, we will try to group questions together in the back end where they're similar, if the same question's asked more than once. So, for example, if the same question's asked in different wording, you may not see your question specifically up on the screen, but another one the same will potentially be there. If you are interested in hearing the answer to a question that has already been asked in the Q&A function, you can like the question, just give it a thumbs up in the Slido. And this will help us to prioritise the questions during the Q&A session at the end if we get a lot of them. So we'll answer the most popular questions first. You'll also notice as well that the chat on this Teams webinar hasn't been enabled, so you won't be able to use this function. And we won't be able to respond to raise hands. So remember, if you do have a question, please use the Slido. If for some reason you actually can't access the Slido, there is a number on the screen to text your question to, and that number is 0425 413 902. So just a note on today's format, we do have an hour and a half scheduled, but we are expecting to wrap up the formal presentation in about 45 minutes. If we answer all of the questions, we will try to wrap up early. And as normal, today's presenters bring a wealth of experience in planning for Australia's energy future. I'm joined by representatives from the Department of Climate Change, the Environment, Energy and Water, and from AEMO Services. And I'll ask each person to turn their camera on and give us a wave when I call them out. So first up, we will hear from Matt Bryan. Matt's the head of office for the Office of the Capacity Investment Scheme. He is an experienced leader in the Australian Public Service and has worked for more than 20 years in Treasury, including leading their macroeconomic modelling and policy, tax analysis, and environment, industry, and infrastructure divisions. Most recently, Matt has led the Communications Infrastructure Division at the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development, Communication, and the Arts, working on the upgrade of the NBN fibre infrastructure and deployment of 5G networks. Matt has previously worked at the Departments of Prime Minister and Cabinet and Finance, including as Principal Policy Advisor for Treasurer Rain Swan during the implementation of the Clean Energy Future Package. Next up, we have Zoe Konovalov, who is the Acting General Manager of the Policy and Engagement Branch in the Office of the Capacity Investment Scheme. Zoe has more than 10 years' experience in the Commonwealth working on climate change and the energy transition. Before joining DQ, she led the development of ARENA's investment plan, including developing its integrating renewables investment priority. Zoe has also had various other positions in the APS, including with the Contract for Closure Task Force at the Department of Resources, Energy and Tourism, and has worked as a private consultant on financial trading strategies in the PJM energy market in the United States. We'll then hear from Dilan Wijadasa, who was a principal advisor in the commercial team at AEMO Services. Dilan is leading the CIS Tender 2 WEM dispatchable capacity for AEMO Services. He has more than 10 years of experience in the energy and corporate finance across the private and public sectors. Before joining AEMO Services, Dilan worked in the energy advisory team at KPMG, where he provided advice on project finance, transactions, financial modelling, and energy policy. And last but not least, we have Alison Wiltshire, General Manager of the Delivery and Governance Branch in the Office of the Capacity Investment Scheme. Alison has more than 20 years' experience on energy policy, technology and investment, and in delivering complex innovation and investment initiatives across the Commonwealth. Alison was previously an investment director at the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, so ARENA, and was part of the team that stood up the government's $15 billion National Reconstruction Fund. So I will now pass to Matt, who will give us a bit of an introduction into today's discussion and set the scene for us.
Thanks, Fiona. As mentioned, the purpose of today's webinar is to present to you details of the CIS Tender 2, which will support dispatchable capacity for the wholesale energy market. Projects in CIS Tender 2 must be located in Western Australia and connect to the Southwest Interconnected System. A separate tender is being conducted for the national energy market, and that has just closed at Stage A. Before diving in, I wanted to thank you all for your engagement so far in our consultation processes, which we conducted to help design the CIS. We take our commitment to public consultation very seriously, and your feedback was beneficial in designing the CIS tailored to the special needs of the WEM. All these submissions received in response to the design paper released in April have been thoroughly considered. We published all the public submissions on our website last week, so you can work through the responses that we received. You can also see how the design of the CIS evolved in response to that feedback. We received feedback from industry, local content providers, our community and First Nations groups. So a very broad range of feedback, and we're grateful for that. Today, our goal is to give you a snapshot of key issues and information for those interested in participating in the scheme. We'll cover an overview of proponent and project eligibility, the tender process, key points and dates, and an overview of the merit criteria. If we could go to the next slide, please. As you would be aware, Tender 2 for WEM dispatchable capacity opened on Monday, the 22nd of July. This was a significant step forward in our progress with the CIS. The tender guidelines, which were published on Monday, contain all the essential information needed for participation. Proponents should thoroughly review the guidelines to understand the requirements and expectations. Please note that registration is mandatory for participation in the tender process. please ensure you complete your registration before the deadline, which is 5 p.m. Australian Western Standard Time on Monday, the 12th of August, 2024, which is also 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. It's crucial that you review the eligibility and merit criteria outlined in the guidelines and align your approach accordingly to increase your chances of success in the tender. If we could move to the next slide, please. This slide provides some background information about the scheme and its objectives. Our overarching goal with the CIS is to drive the deployment of 32 gigawatts of renewable and clean dispatchable capacity by 2030. This is critical to achieving the government's 82% renewable energy target, which in turn is central to achieving the legislated 43% emissions reduction target. In Tender 2, we aim to deliver a target of 500 megawatts of 4-hour equivalent or 2,000 megawatt hours of clean dispatchable capacity across the WEM. This allocation is, of course, subject to the availability of suitably meritorious projects. The targets are ambitious, but we need to move quickly to achieve our ambitious 2030 targets. We have received a lot of interest from project proponents and the finance sector across Australia, and this gives us confidence that we'll have a good volume of quality projects to choose from. The response to the ongoing VIC-SA dispatchable tender and the NEM Tender 1 that I mentioned earlier is also reassuring. Projects aiming for a commercial operation date of 1 October 2026 or earlier will be given higher merit. Again, this incentivises timely project completion and helps meet our capacity more quickly. We'll go to the next slide, please. As you'll see on this slide, we have established an indicative tender timeframe for Tender 2. Stage A officially opened on 22 July. Proponents can now begin preparing and submitting their initial project bids. The deadline for submitting Stage A project bids is 5 p.m. Australian Western Standard Time or 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on Monday, the 19th of August. Please ensure all necessary documentation and proposals are submitted by this date and time. We expect invitations to submit Stage B proposals will be sent out in October 2024. Please note this timeframe is indicative and may be subject to change. Final dates will be communicated via the online portal along with specific times. The closing date for Stage B submissions is scheduled for November 2024. Again, keep an eye on the online portal for the exact date. And the outcome of the tender process is expected to be announced in March 2025. We look forward to sharing the results and moving forward with successful projects. Now I'll hand over to our next presenter, Zoe Konovalov, to take you through the eligibility criteria for the tender. Thanks, Zoe.
Thank you very much, Matt. So this slide shows some of the key commercial elements of the Dispatchable Capacity Investment Scheme Agreement, or CISA. So the table on the right shows those key commercial terms, and they include 3 key biddable financial terms. Those are the annual floor and ceiling and the annual payment cap. So these are revenue-based for dispatchable, the dispatchable CISA. So this is based on annual revenue, and the annual floor and ceiling, as I said, are biddable variables. They can be provided as a schedule outlining the annual floor and ceiling in dollars per megawatt for each peak capacity credit that's assigned in respect of a support year. And this can be as a fixed nominal price for the support period or a fixed nominal amount where this can vary from year to year. And then the third biddable key financial term is the annual payment cap. So this is this sets a limit on the annual support provided through the dispatchable CISA, and symmetrically, it also sets a limit on the revenue sharing that can be clawed back. Other key commercial terms include the support term. So this is also specified in the bid up to a maximum of 15 years after the support start date. Support has to start after the commissioning of a project. And the final terms, which are fixed, include the revenue floor support percentage of 90%. So the Commonwealth will pay the owner of the project 90% of the revenue shortfall below this floor, the biddable floor, and the owner will pay the Commonwealth 50% of revenue above the biddable ceiling. And the purpose of these is to ensure that there's always some incentive to profit maximize at kind of all levels of revenue for the project. So those are the key commercial terms of the dispatchable CIS. On the next slide, we outline some of the eligibility criteria. So Tender 2 is open to dispatchable capacity projects in the WEM that meet these eligibility criteria. There's a number of eligibility criteria that are proponent specific. So you must hold an ABN, not have a judicial decision relating to employee entitlements made against the proponent, must be compliant with the Workplace Gender Equality Act 2012, not have an inquiry with the National Anti-Corruption Commission, not be listed on the DFAT consolidated list, and must comply with the Modern Slavery Act 2018. So those are the key eligibility criteria for proponents. In terms of the projects, the dispatchable capacity projects must have a minimum duration of 2 hours. Now, projects that have a longer duration than 2 hours are welcome to apply, and they'll be merit assessed in terms of their reliability benefits. So we will compare different durations of projects against each other, and we'll be accounting for that, the different value of the duration lengths. Projects must have a fuel source that is an eligible renewable energy source and or charge from the CIS. And there's a minimum threshold for capacity of at least 30 megawatts. We're happy to hear feedback on this. This is one term that has been the subject of feedback previously. It's an attempt to strike a balance between the kind of overhead burden of assessing a large number of projects. The project must not have been awarded capacity credits in a reserve capacity cycle prior to 2023. The project must not be in receipt of similar long-term government underwriting revenue support. And the project must not have been party to a contract with AEMO under the NCESS framework prior to its commercial operation, and must have submitted a connection inquiry form to Western Power. So these are the key eligibility requirements to participate. And I will pass to Dylan from AEMO, who will talk more about the merit criteria.
Thanks, Zoe. So this page outlines the process that we run, and to anyone who's familiar with previous tenders that AEMO services have run, this will look really familiar to you. In a nutshell, we use a two-stage assessment process. Stage A is more of a qualitative assessment that looks at the quality of both the project and the proponent. We then shortlist a select number of bidders before we take them through to stage B. And at stage B, we assess the financial value of the project, the departures against a set of project documents, and firm commitments for social license and First Nations communities. After we run that process, there's a further step of due diligence before we make recommendations to the Commonwealth. So if we go to the next page, we'll quickly step through each of the merit criteria in a bit more detail. So for stage A, as I said before, we look at 3 merit criteria. Merit criteria 1 looks at the deliverability of the project and its timeline for reaching commercial operations date. So for this tender, it's really important that projects are able to participate in either the 2024 or at latest the 2025 reserve capacity cycle. So that's one of the key elements that we're looking for. The other things we're looking for merit criteria 1 include projects that have received an access offer from Western Power for the proposed network connection, or have solid plans in place to achieve that access offer in line with the COD target date for the project. We'll also be looking for projects that have the required planning and regulatory approvals. projects that have where external financing is required, conditional financing arrangements with their either debt and equity providers, projects that have by the time of bid secured all the land tenure rights for the project, and projects that have executed either a long form contract or a term sheet with their EPC contractors and or original equipment manufacturers. Merit criteria 2 takes a step back and looks at the proponent who's being proposed to deliver the project. So this looks at the organisational capacity of that proponent to deliver the project. So it looks at the track record of the proponent in delivering comparable projects, and that doesn't necessarily have to be in the wholesale electricity market, can be across Australia and even internationally. We then also look at the skills that are required to deliver the project and evidence that the proponent has those skills within their organisations and detailed plans, if they don't, for securing those skills to get the project across the line. Merit criteria 3 is the last one in stage A, and this looks at First Nations engagement, engagement with local communities, and plans for benefit sharing. And so you note social license is spread across both stages, and that's intentional. At stage A, we're looking for projects that can show evidence towards their ability to engage with and build trust with local and First Nations communities. We're looking for evidence that the project has already engaged with local communities and First Nations groups, and in fact that engagement has led to the design of the benefit sharing initiatives that are proposed under the project. And lastly, we're looking under this stage A assessment for projects to complete a returnable schedule for merit criteria 3, and that will have scope and milestones sort of clearly detailed, and that would be contractually enforceable in stage B, which we'll go to next. So as I mentioned before, there'll be a shortlisting project process between stage A and stage B. So for the projects that are shortlisted for stage B, this stage is now more focused on financial value, and there's 3 elements to this. The first is the financial value and capacity credits assessment. So the first part of this is some modelling that we undertake to look at where the project is, the type of technology and the size of the project. And we're looking for projects that are located in areas that are forecast to have low amounts of network congestion, and also a low likelihood that their generation would be constrained in different dispatch scenarios. And for anyone familiar in the Western Australian context, that will be a really similar process to what's undertaken in the reserve capacity mechanism. Along those lines, we'll look at the project's potential network access quantity and their ability to receive capacity credits. And that's as a proportion of their peak certified reserve capacity. And that's really to make sure that we're not artificially biasing either longer or shorter duration storage projects in our assessment. Why do we look at all this? One, it gives us confidence that the project be able to receive capacity credits and be able to reach COD, but also because under the terms of the dispatchable CESA, payments are denominated in terms of megawatts of capacity credit. So it's important that we have an idea on what that capacity credit assessment could look like. And so all this flows into our assessment of net dispatchable CESA costs and wholesale market benefits. What does it mean for projects? It means that in terms of things that bidders can control, we'd be looking for low revenue floors, low ceilings, and low annual payment caps. Move on to MC5 quickly. This looks at commercial departures against the project documents. So we're really looking for bids that fit into our pro forma project documents with no or minimal changes to the risk allocation between the Commonwealth and the offtake and the proponent. Merit criteria 6 then looks at First Nations and social license commitments, and at this stage we're looking for firm commitments that are contractually enforceable and commitments that provide economic empowerment and benefits for First Nations communities. And examples of those are equity sharing schemes or revenue sharing schemes as a result of the project. At this stage, we're also looking for demonstrated commitment to local employment, training, high labour standards, and also commitment to support Australian supply chains and the use of local content where possible. So that recaps the assessment process and the merit criteria we look at. I think I'll now hand over to Alison. Thank you.
Thanks, Delan. Just carrying on the social licence theme, as Delan has already outlined, there is a merit criteria at both stage A and B on social licence and First Nations commitment, which really reflects our strong commitments in these areas. The Australian Government expects that as the energy transition develops, genuine and long-lasting economic and social partnerships will emerge between the clean energy industry and communities to better support and seize the opportunities of a net zero economy, including, of course, for projects supported via the Capacity Investment Scheme. And we do see many benefits to investing in First Nations and social licence outcomes. For example, it drives better outcomes for First Nations communities, local communities and regional economies. It helps assist the transition to renewables by building positive experiences and better developer reputations. It also helps facilitate the timely delivery on projects if you have all of those communities on board, and thereby also helps reduce delays and costs across the whole life of projects. Just for everyone's information, if you haven't discovered it already, there is a social licence market brief on the AEMO Services website, so it will be on the Tender 2 site. I encourage you all to read that, as it will give you some tips on how to prepare your response to both merit criteria 3 and 6 in terms of your social licence commitments. Before I move on, just a reminder that it is important to address all merit criteria quite fulsomely and to a very high degree, and in this case with genuine and meaningful commitments. Projects that are low against any merit criteria, including these, may not be progressed to the progressed in the assessment phase, or you may not be progressed to the next stage, for example, from stage A to stage B. Just onto the last slide before I hand back over to Fiona for some questions. Just a bit of a recap of where we are in the process. So the tender guidelines have been published. The stage A bid form is open, and the Q&A process is also open as well. So if you do have any further questions after the session today, please make sure you utilise that Q&A session and your question will be responded to via that means. The Capacity Investment Scheme agreement itself was also added to the website yesterday. So basically you do now have everything you need to prepare your bids. And I'll now hand back over to Fiona, who will facilitate our Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Alison. And you can probably leave your camera on, because I think the first question is going to be for you today. But I'll just run through a bit of housekeeping for the Q&A session again. So we are now ready to take some questions, and we've got quite a number that have already come through during the presentation so far, which is fantastic. We'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can today. We have been a bit quicker than we thought we might be with the presentation, so that leaves plenty of time for lots of questions. So up on the screen again, we've just got the QR code. So you can join the discussion by following that code on the screen or by visiting slido.com and entering the code 1291746. And if you can't access the Q&A via Slido, you can also text your questions to 0425 413 902. So something, I guess, that's important on this is, some of the questions might be quite detailed and technical, and if that's the case, we may not be able to get to those today, but we'll let you know and we'll do our best. We will give you just a minute to follow that link. But while we're doing so, I might just pass to Alison for the first question. And the first question is the October 2027 COD target a hard requirement for projects?
Thanks, Fiona. So it's not a hard requirement in that you would be ineligible if you had a COD after that time. But we don't think that if you did have a COD after that time, that you would possibly be successful. So I'll just read directly from the guidelines. It does say that projects that submit a COD later than 1 October 2027 are unlikely to be assessed further. So not a hard and fast rule, but we do think to be competitive that you will have to have a COD before that date.
Thank you so much. And Joe, I might just get you to stop sharing that screen so that we can see the presenters a bit better on the screen itself. The next question is for Delan, and the question is, how does the tender fit into the existing RCM process?
Thanks, Fiona. So there's two ways in which the tender fits into the RCM process. So the first is that we undertake a similar assessment to what's done in the RCM to consider a project's ability to get capacity credits. Also importantly to note, this doesn't actually guarantee an RCM outcome. We follow a similar set of principles around assessment, but as you read in the tender guidelines, it does not in any way guarantee an RCM outcome, which is handled by AMO through a separate process. So that's the first way. The second way is through the payment mechanism. So you'll note in the key commercial terms in the tender guidelines, the annual payment floor and the annual payment ceiling are tied to the amount of capacity credits held by the project over its life. And so payments under the CISA will float in accordance with the capacity credits that are gained by the project in that RCM process. And I'll also note that payments in the contract, which was released yesterday, payments under the CISA are linked to the commencement of payments under the reserve capacity mechanism as well. So there's a few ways in which we tie in to the RCM process.
Thanks so much, Delan. The next one is for you, Matt, and the question is, will the slides be shared with all participants afterwards?
Thanks, Fiona. Yes, we'll put, as we have with previous webinars, we'll put the video of this webinar and a transcript up on the AEMO Tender 2 webpage, and the slides will be visible from the video, so everyone will be able to access those. Thank you.
Thank you. The next one is for Zoe, and I think the one after that's also for Zoe. The first question is, will flexible capacity credits be included in the CISA underwriting?
Thanks, Fiona, and thanks for the question. Yes, so only peak capacity credits will be considered for the purposes of calculating the annual floor each year. However, both peak and flexible capacity credit revenue will be considered in the overall net revenue calculation.
Thank you so much, Zoe. And then the next one is for you as well. And that question is is this tender only looking to support project debt components like other schemes do?
So look, we don't have the ability to target a specific ratio of debt and average and equity coverage with these CISA products, because the floor and ceiling settings are going to be the product of a competitive outcome. So in terms of proponents' bids, we encourage you to bid at a price that you feel is going to be competitive in the tender and is going to be sufficient to get your investment over the line. So in this environment of significant change and uncertainty, the purpose of this is to cover that uncertainty, including the potential of low price environments. So depending on the quality and mix of projects on offer, it's entirely possible that the CIS may underwrite a floor price that potentially covers both debt and some equity components to facilitate project development, or not. So it will be, as I said, a product of that competitive outcome.
Thanks so much for that,
and
Zoe.
I'll just actually, sorry, Fiona, I will add that that we have a confidential budget envelope for the scheme. So to kind of maximize competitive tension, we won't be publishing that budget envelope. But the budget envelope has been set with the acknowledgement that 82% is a very ambitious and challenging target that will probably require a net subsidy to the sector to make it happen. So we're pushing more, we're accelerating investment, and so our budget envelope has been set with that in mind.
Thank you so much for that. We'll move to Alison now. And Alison, the question for you is, are hybrid projects eligible to participate in the CISA tender?
Thank you, Fiona. Yes, hybrid projects are absolutely eligible for this particular tender. There is some, can't get my words out today. There are some specific details on hybrid projects in the guidelines. So I'd direct you to section 2.2.1, and it gives you a bit of an outline of how we view hybrid projects there. Also, in terms of the actual capacity investment scheme agreement, there are some drafting notes in that also provides guidance as to how we handle hybrid projects in the contract.
Thanks so much. We'll go back to Zoe again. Zoe, the next question is for you, and the question is, will only 2-hour storage duration projects be able to bid in Tender 2?
Thank you. No, so as I said in the presentation, 2 hours is the minimum duration of dispatchable capacity. So anything below 2 hours can't bid. If you're above 2 hours, you can bid. And our assessment process will be taking into account the additional reliability and system benefits of longer durations of dispatchable capacity. So beyond 2 hours, that will be taken into account in the assessment process. The 2 hours is the minimum.
Thank you so much. We'll pop to you next, Delan, and the question for you is around the criteria specifically. So EC14 requires connection inquiry submitted. If inquiry is skipped, is it possible to meet this eligibility criteria through submission of the access application?
It's a good question. I'll just recap EC14 for all. So EC14 states the project must be the subject of connection inquiry form that has been submitted to Western Power. I mean, the intent of that eligibility criteria is to set a bar for how progress your project has been before you're ready to participate in this tender. And so if that step has been skipped and you're sort of further ahead in the development pathway, that's something that we can assess, but it's important that that is noted in the project bid form that that step has been skipped, and if the proponent is able to submit the information that supports that, that's something that will be assessed in the process.
Thank you so much for that. The next one, I believe, is back to Zoe again. So Zoe, why are projects that are awarded capacity credits prior to the 2023 RCC not eligible for this tender?
Thank you. So projects reaching financial close prior to December 2023 would have been eligible to participate in the 2023 RCC. So the rationale for this cutoff is to increase market competition and help secure prospective projects on or after the 2024-25 RCC capacity year.
Thank you. Back to Alison now with a question on social licence. So Alison, why are there social licence merit criteria in both Stage A and Stage B?
Thanks, Fiona. That is a good question, and it is very deliberate that we do have social licence at both Stage A and Stage B. Also recognising at Stage A, everyone should have to have engaged with their community to a degree. So in Stage A, projects are expected to provide information relating to their engagement strategies and understanding of First Nations, stakeholder and local communities, and also outline any binding community benefit sharing initiatives with those. So at that very early stage in the tender, we expect everybody to be able to answer that. And then to those that are taken through to Stage B specifically considers binding commitments that projects will make towards elements such as First Nations commitments, supply chain, employment and local content. So at that Stage B, those commitments are contractually binding. Thanks, Fiona.
Thank you. Back to Zoe again. Zoe, you are the woman of the hour, as you seem to be in a lot of these webinars, I think. So your question is, why is financial value and capacity credits the most heavily weighted merit criterion?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Look, it's a great question. The financial value and capacity credits merit criterion is the most heavily weighted one, as that is the place where we consider the impact of the project on reliability outcomes, impact on wholesale market prices, and also the forecast cost of the dispatchable CISA to taxpayers. So this is the merit criterion 4. So it will consider a project's potential network access quantity as a proportion of its peak CRC, and will also forecast the wholesale price suppression that occurs as a result of the marginal impact of this project, and will forecast a range of different market modeling scenarios and the projected cost of the dispatchable CISA in those scenarios, so the cost to taxpayers. And so the upshot of all of that is going to be a measurement of the value for money of the CISA in terms of the financial value against the reliability value to taxpayers. Now, I will note that while MC4, the financial value merit criterion, is the highest weighted, as Alison noted in one of her previous answers, proponents should note that projects are expected to score well across all the merit criterias, and projects that show low merit against any individual merit criteria may not be further assessed and may not be progressed to the financial value shortlist.
Thank you so much, Zoe. We'll go to Delan next, and it's a question around BESS. So Delan, how will the assessment of a 4-hour BESS differ from the assessment of a 2-hour BESS?
The short answer is there's no hard and fast rules. Our assessment process doesn't sort of create explicit rules around how we assess different durations of storage projects. It comes down to two things. So differing amounts of storage will have different impacts on the market, and we model the impact that each project has on the market. So a 4-hour duration project will be able to dispatch in different time intervals to a 2-hour, and that'll come out in the wholesale market benefits that project will have. It's also anticipated, all else being equal, a longer duration project would also have a higher payment floor and ceiling, and so that higher floor and ceiling will also flow through to the forecast cost of the dispatchable CISA. So no hard and fast rules again, but it does impact both the benefits that the project has and the forecast cost.
Thank you. And I'll get you to keep your camera on because the next one is for you as well, Delan, and it is around the financial mechanics. So the financial mechanics of the WEM CISA look very similar to the NEM CISA. Can you confirm whether there are any differences from a financial perspective?
It's a tricky question. There are lots of nuanced differences between the two products. And those differences have been driven by the needs of the technology that's being supported. So under the NEM CISA, for tender round 1 in the NEM, that's there to support generation. This WEM CISA T2 is looking to support storage. And so a lot of the payment mechanisms are different. For example, the easiest one is the floor and the ceiling. So floors and ceilings under the WEM CISA are paid on a dollars per megawatt capacity credit basis, which is different to what's done in the NEM. So there are lots of nuanced differences, but I recommend that you go through the key commercial terms of the tender guidelines, information on how the WEM CISA is structured, and also the dispatchable CISA contract as well, which again was released yesterday to the market.
Fantastic, thank you. Now the next one's for you, Matt. The question that the person said in a roundabout slide 8 of the presentation, it was mentioned 32 gigawatts by 2030. How is the WEM targeting to achieve this?
Thanks, Fiona. Yes, so we're targeting 32 gigawatts by 2030. Of that, 23 gigawatts is variable renewable energy, and 9 gigawatts is dispatchable clean energy. The allocation across the states are subject to bilateral negotiations, and the agreements that are coming out of those negotiations are called the Renewable Energy Transformation Agreements. So the agreement for WA was announced on Monday, and it allocated at least 1.1 gigawatts of dispatchable energy to WA. That is, of course, subject to the availability of suitably meritorious projects, but assuming we do receive meritorious bids, then 1.1 gigawatts has been locked away for WA. Then, of course, there is a national component above and beyond the amount that's locked away through the renewable energy transformation agreements. That national component will be allocated on the basis of the competitiveness of the bids. So I guess in summary, there's at least 1.1 gigawatts of dispatchable energy locked away for WA, and then it could be allocated more depending on the competitiveness of the bids compared to the competitiveness of bids from other jurisdictions. That announcement on Monday also set out the allocation for variable renewable energy, and that was set at 6.5 terawatt hours. So that announcement's available on Minister Bowen's website if you're interested in looking at that in a little bit more detail. Thanks, Fiona.
Thanks, Matt. Now back to Zoe again, and it's around, Zoe, is there a definition of project for the 30 megawatt minimum? Would a project of several smaller facilities behind separate connection points that add up to more than 30 megawatts be eligible?
Yeah, so look, thank you. This is a great question. So for future tenders in both the NEM and the WEM, we are looking at flexibility on that 30 megawatt minimum. So we will be looking at the inclusion of VPP, and we will be looking at the potential for including several smaller facilities that kind of chunk up to 30 megawatts, so that it's something that we can definitely see the benefits of those, and the kind of, there's a lot of advantages of that flexibility. We are moving fast with the CIS, and we're not there yet. So for the current tender, unfortunately, that 30 megawatt threshold is for the single connection point, so that the question about combining several smaller facilities, that's not possible for this tender. But as I said, we are looking hard at that for future tenders.
Thank you so much. We'll go to Matt next. Matt, will you consider more than 2,000 megawatt hours if the quality is suitable and financial offers are attractive?
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. So ultimately, that'll be a decision for the minister, based on the advice from AMS Services Limited coming out of the tender process. There are a couple of policy considerations. Obviously, we're very committed to that delivery of 32 gigawatts by 2030. So that would suggest the more projects we can lock in earlier, the better. On the other hand, we don't want everyone rushing into this first auction. We do want people to have confidence that it's a 3-year program, and if they take the time to develop the projects, and if they are in the second or third WA tender, then there's going to be scope available for them to be funded. So you've got those two competing policy considerations that the minister will need to weigh up. Of course, in terms of the good tender process, when you announce a target, it's an indicative target. If we don't receive adequate bids, we may fund under the target. If we, as history to date has proven, if we receive a very large number of bids, then there is scope for us to go, slightly over that and still adhere to good tender process. But we wouldn't want to go so far over the announced target that proponents feel perhaps they've been misled by the fact that we announced a target of 2 and we ended up perhaps funding 4. They might feel that they were misled and prepared their bids based on a misunderstanding of the Commonwealth's objectives. So look, there is a little bit of scope to move around the 2,000 megawatt hours target. There are a couple of policy considerations for the minister to weigh up as to his preparedness to do that. We do, of course, have the VIC SA outcomes coming out in the next couple of months. I think that'll be quite instructive as to the approach the minister adopted there, because that was a tender that was heavily oversubscribed with the 2.4 gigawatt hour target. Now, exactly how much is funded coming out of that, might be the best guidance that can be provided. I might stop there, Fiona, and hand back to you.
Fantastic, thank you. Now, I think I skipped to the question earlier that was very well liked. So we'll go back to Delan. And the question is, can we bid 12 to 14 hours duration of storage, or is there a maximum duration that will be considered?
Good question. Maybe for our answer, I was remiss to miss one important point on my last answer around the payments mechanism. So I'll just note, so the WEM CISA and the NEM CISA are quite different. There is good precedent in the SA Vic CISA because they're both designed for storage projects. So those two products are quite similar. But again, the key difference in the WEM is that payments are denominated in terms of dollars per megawatt of capacity credit. To this question, so is there any maximum duration that we'd look at? The answer is no. There's no maximum duration eligibility criteria. So projects that have really deep storage are really encouraged to come in and participate. And the value of that deep storage, again, will be reflected primarily through the value of that deep storage to the wholesale market in WA.
Thanks so much for that, Delan. The next question, so let me just go back here. The next question is for you, Zoe, and it's around the feedback in the consultation process. How was the feedback in the consultation around long duration storage received? Is it likely to see future tender prioritising long duration storage?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So, look, we're really keen to hear industry feedback, and there is quite a lot of interest in long duration storage. What I would say is, building on the answer that Delan just provided, is that in general in the CIS we take an approach which is as technology neutral as possible, and aimed at the kind of policy objectives that we've got for the CIS. And so that flows through to storage duration, where what we've tried to do is build an assessment methodology that can account for the benefits of longer duration storage without needing to have a specific quota. So as Delan said, there's no maximum duration of storage that we'll consider. And we do extensive modeling as part of the assessment process, where we look at the impact on wholesale prices from particular duration projects, as well as the reliability value, which can be different. And so we assess the cost of supporting a project against both of those benefits. So to the extent that there's a project with a longer duration, you'd expect that flow through impact to wholesale prices and the reliability value to be higher. So you could easily support a project being higher value for money, even if it has a higher cost, because it also has higher benefits in that way. So our intention is that the assessment process should be able to handle that difference without putting in a quota for a particular duration, other than that 2-hour minimum. We also aim to continually improve our process, and we'll be kind of scrutinizing the results of every tender. And so I suppose we are open to changing course if it looks like that's not working, but for the moment, that's our plan, and that's our sort of policy design principle for the CIS.
Thanks so much, Zoe. Back to Delan with the next one, which is around the minimum size. So the 30 megawatt minimum size, am I correct in assuming that is 30 megawatt nameplate capacity and not 30 megawatts of peak capacity credits?
Yes, that's correct. So eligibility is based on nameplate capacity. and the payment terms are based on megawatts of capacity credits. So there is a sort of slight distinction there. But to answer the question, yes, eligibility is based on 30 megawatts of nameplate capacity.
Thank you so much. And the next one is back to Zoe. Will a virtual power plant or aggregated generation and storage be eligible for this tender?
Yeah, so I did address this in a previous response. We aren't able to make VPP eligible at the moment, but we're very keen to include it into future tenders. There's just a number of detailed issues to work through with VPP, and we need to make sure that our assessment process is kind of rigorous enough to be able to handle those projects and compare them on a like-for-like basis. So that's what we're working through, but we see the value of VPP for the system. And as I said, we are very keen to support it in future tenders and keen to work with industry on how to do that well.
Thank you, Zoe. Back to Delan again. And the question is, what is the weighting of each merit criteria?
Thanks, Fiona. Let me just get to the weightings. So again, across the two stages, there's 6 merit criteria. So we start with merit criteria 1, project deliverability and timeline. That's weighted 40% of the stage A score. Merit criteria 2, which is the organization's capacity and capability to deliver the project, that's weighted at 30%. Merit criteria 3, which looks at First Nations engagement, community engagement, benefit sharing, is weighted at 30% again. So that's totals to 100% for stage A. And for stage B, merit criteria 4, which is financial value and capacity credits, is weighted 65% of the stage B score. Merit criteria 5, which looks at the commercial departures away from the project documents, is weighted at 10%. Merit criteria 6, which looks at First Nations and social license commitments, is weighted at 25%. It is important to note, though, that really sort of poor performance in any merit criteria could mean that the project isn't assessed any further. So just because a particular merit criteria has a different weighting to another, doesn't mean that poor performance would sort of be accepted or sort of would still mean that you progress through the process. So it's important that projects and proponents score as highly as they can across all merit criteria.
Thanks for that, Dylan. Let's go back to Matt, please. Matt, can you explain who pays the CIS payment? What's the budget for this WEM tender, and whether this will be recouped by passing payment on to the end consumer?
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. So the payments are made from the Commonwealth budget. So in the same way that other payments are paid from the Commonwealth, this will be a payment from the Commonwealth to the project proponent, and the mechanism for that is sort of set out in the guidelines. The allocation, the budget allocation for the scheme, it is provided for in the budget, and there's a bit more detail about this in the May budget, and the mid-year economic and fiscal outlook in December last year sort of steps through the accounting treatment. I guess the short answer is there is a provision there. The exact amount is not published, and the reason for that is that if we were to announce the amount we have set aside, you could sort of divide that by the 32 gigawatts and then work out what our preparedness to pay was, which we think would undermine competitive tension in the process. So look, we haven't announced, I guess, how much we're prepared to pay. We're going to evaluate the tenders that come in against the merit criteria that Delan set out. Financial value is an important merit criteria, but as Alison mentioned, the social licence criteria is particularly important for the government, and we'll be looking at that carefully, as well as deliverability. It's very important for us that we have confidence that the project is going to be delivered on time, and that we have them pumping or supporting the grid at 2030. So we by no means are looking at the lowest cost projects. We want to have confidence that we're going to deliver the outcome that the government wants, which is the 32 gigawatts of projects operating by 2030. Hopefully that sort of helps you understand the budgeting and also the broader approach to the financials. Thanks, Fiona.
Thanks, Matt. Back to Zoe again. Zoe, the minimum capacity is 30 megawatts. Are there any maximum capacities, noting the max N-1 capacity in the Swiss is 330 megawatts?
Yeah, thank you. That's an interesting question. So we don't have an explicit maximum capacity for a project. However, I would note that there are a couple of elements of the assessment process where this would kind of play in. So we merit assess projects on their deliverability. And you can imagine that a very large project may have some deliverability challenges. And also part of the merit assessment that we look at, as I discussed in the financial value assessment, is we look at the flow and impact on wholesale prices as a result of a project, so the kind of system impacts. And again, a project that's sort of big enough to swamp the overall market, that might play into that sort of assessment process and sort of skew the benefits that you'd expect. So it would be unlikely for a project that large to be competitive, but as I said, there's no explicit maximum capacity.
Thank you so much, Zoe. And the next one is for you as well, and it's another one about BESS. So if the project is an additional BESS installation of a current renewable energy generation that has been awarded prior to the 2023 RCC, can you consider as hybrid?
So we would not consider that to be a hybrid project. However, if the storage component has a separate connection point, then it would be eligible to bid in as a project on its own.
Thank you so much for that. The next one again is to Matt. Matt, will there be a second dispatchable WEM tender?
Thanks, Fiona. Yes, we're anticipating there'll be 3 dispatchable WEM tenders sort of run on an annual basis. So I mentioned before the 1.1 gigawatt allocation for WA. Obviously, we've got 500 megawatts in this auction, and there's 600 left to go, depending on take up in the current auction. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next one I will go back to Delan with, and the question is on the merit criteria on network constraints. Will projects in areas of existing network congestion that improve the network outcomes be scored higher?
It's a good question. The short answer is that that's assessed in merit assessment, and so to be able to sort of give you firm indications would sort of be prejudging a process that we're yet to run. But it's important to note that merit criteria assessment looks at the benefits that the project can deliver to the WEM and forecast wholesale costs. So if by unlocking additional generation in the wholesale electricity market and alleviating congestion, that's reflected through the modelling. That'll flow through to the wholesale market benefits side of our assessment.
Thank you very much, Delan, for that. The next question is back to Zoe again. And the question is, are there any other benefits apart from the floor support?
Oh, thank you. No, look, I suppose not. So the real sort of mechanism of the CIS is that guarantee of a minimum revenue floor, which we hope will accelerate investment by alleviating the uncertainty, especially the uncertainty that's associated with low price scenarios. So all of those settings in the CISA are biddable variables. So we encourage projects to sort of think about what do they need to get over the line, and what the competition might be like when putting together your bid. The purpose of the CIS is not to replace the existing operation of the wholesale market, but just to supplement it by covering that uncertainty. So we do aim to be light touch. We don't have extensive operational requirements. It's really just the provision of that floor.
Thanks for that, Zoe. We'll go to Alison next. Alison, do tenders require a complete answer to all of the project bid merit criteria content?
I think that's a question for proponents. It's up to you what you submit, but I think the answer is that if you did not give a comprehensive answer to every question, you would be very, very unlikely to proceed in the process. So as we've already outlined, the guidelines do say that you may not be continue to be considered in the process if any of your questions are low merit. So it's highly likely that if you didn't give a fulsome answer that you would be low merit. But the system doesn't make you give answers, but we would strongly encourage very comprehensive, fulsome answers.
Thanks for that, Alison. The next question I'll send first to Delan, and then Zoe, you may have something to add to the answer. And the question is, must tenders be for fixed prices or can they be linked to CPI?
Thanks, Fiona. So there's a couple of ways in which you can bid the annual payment floor, annual payment ceiling, and annual payment cap. So those numbers themselves can be fixed nominal prices, or can be bid in a strip of prices that can be in a schedule. So not able to support a fixed escalator or a floating link to CPI, but a schedule, either a schedule of prices or a fixed flat nominal price.
Thanks for that. Back to Zoe again with the next one. And the question is, has any analysis been carried out on the impact of the tender process and timing of delivered projects against the planned closure of coal in WA?
Thank you. So yes is the short answer. So the CIS tender is aligned with and aims to support the RCM process, and the Australian Energy Market Operators Electricity Statement of Opportunities recognizes that coal closure schedule in the WEM when considering the capacity targets in the RCM process. And I would say, in terms of policy alignment, I'd also direct your attention to recent news about a renewable energy transformation agreement that's been signed between the Commonwealth and Western Australia. And so this agreement is part of the government's plan to deliver that additional 32 gigawatts of renewable generation and storage that Matt B talked about. And so that RETA, Renewable Energy Transformation Agreement, that includes commitments on both the side of WA and the Commonwealth to align together and to align with actions on both sides to achieve that 82% renewable by 2030 target.
Thank you. We'll stick with you, Zoe, for the next one. And the next question is about hybrid projects. So if a hybrid project is a single SPV, for example, wind and or solar plus BESS, does this mean the BESS is not eligible for a dispatchable CISA in this tender round?
No, so it would be eligible in this round, and it would be considered a single hybrid project if they have the same connection point. if the assets are separately certified components.
Thanks, Zoe. Back to you, Delan. The process for moving from stage A to stage B, do participants submit updated information between the two stages, or is the assessment solely done on the information provided at A?
So the scoring for stage A is done based on the information we ask in stage A, and likewise the score for stage B is done on the information we ask in stage B. There may be some instances where the same information or similar information is requested across both stages, and that's particularly relevant to the social license criteria. But the expectation is that the project certainly doesn't sort of materially change between stage A or stage B.
Fantastic. To Zoe again next. Zoe, would this scheme cover shortfalls should a facility's NAC reduce and impact capacity credit payments over time?
No, so the intention is not that the CIS would cover reductions in a facility's NAC. And I'll just direct you to the comments I made earlier about we're aiming not to kind of impact on the normal market operation. And so we want to maintain WEM locational market signals. We intend for the CIS to be quite light touch and not to interfere with those.
Thank you. Back to Matt now. And the question is there any forecast on a WEM generation tender?
Thanks, Fiona. Yeah, we haven't published an exact date. It'll be in 2025, but the exact time frame for that will be something for the minister to announce. Obviously, we're very keen to get that VRE generation up and operating by 2030. So the sooner we can get that started, the better. I mean, that's really essential for us to meet our renewable energy targets to get the VRE projects up and operating. So we're committed to do that, and the minister will announce the time frame for that in the not too distant future. Thanks, Fiona.
Thank you. Back to Delan now. So Delan, does planning and regulatory approvals for MC1 mean the EPA and EPBC assessments would need to be completed, or demonstration that the project is in the process?
Thanks, Fiona. Because this is the criteria that's merit assessed, there's no firm threshold. So we'd look at both. Obviously, deliverability is a really important part of the merit criteria. And again, all else being equal, a project that has the necessary approvals in place would be looked upon more favourably in assessment than a project that didn't have those approvals in place or was in progress towards achieving those approvals.
Thank you very much, Delan. So the next one is again to Zoe, sorry, actually, I think it's for Alison, this one. Are you providing any visibility on the location of projects bidding in, on the location that projects are bidding in to ensure a good geographic spread and to help applicants avoid doubling up on bids?
Thanks, Fiona. That's a very good question. I can fully appreciate why people might want to know that, but the short answer right now is no. So that sort of information is confidential to each applicant's bid, and obviously that could be disadvantaged projects if we put that sort of information out into the market. So you will also note that in the guidelines as part of the assessment process, when we look at the overall portfolio of projects, we can look at the geographic spread so that we don't have projects, we're not funding projects in geographic locations that may not be optimal. But at the time of application, no, we won't disclose that information.
Thanks, Alison. The next one's back to Zoe. And the question is there any visibility over the current development pipeline in the WEM to ensure a good geographical spread?
So I'm interpreting this question is a bit different than the one that Alison just asked. So I'm taking that to mean, are we looking at the geographic spread when we choose our projects? And the answer is Yes. So there's a section in the tender guidelines which describes how after the kind of the completion of the financial value shortlist, AEMO does have the opportunity to then consider the kind of portfolio issues associated with that collection of projects, and there is the chance for AEMO to kind of reorder the projects on that financial value shortlist in response to such things as, for example, geographic or technology concentration. So that is part of the assessment process.
Thanks, Zoe. The next one's for Delan again. Delan, can a consortium bid?
Yes, consortia can bid in the process. There is guidance on how consortiums can bid in the tender guidelines in the tender conditions section. So one of those conditions is that each party of the consortium must meet the eligibility criteria as well. So recommend that tender guidelines, that section 4 is looked at for more information for that.
Thank you for that. So the next one we'll go to Matt for. Matt, this person has noticed that in the published consultation submissions on the DECU website, there was no response to submissions submitted. Any plan to provide responses?
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. Look, we received a really strong response to the CIS consultations, which was fantastic. I think there are over 100 submissions received, which is just fantastic. Each of those submissions was worked through and considered and used to inform the design and implementation of the capacity investment scheme, including the capacity investment scheme agreements and also the tender guidelines. Unfortunately, with the speed we're moving at, we're focused on using the feedback to design the product. We've published each of the submissions that gave us consent to do so to ensure transparency, but we're not proposing to publish sort of a detailed response to each submission. We're really focusing on getting the product out there and getting the process moving so we can provide financial certainty to projects as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Now, Zoe, this next one is for you. And the question is, how can bidders be sure that there will be adequate transmission capacity to support their projects?
Yeah, so I suppose at the highest level, the CIS is we're aiming to cover uncertainty for projects in terms of especially low prices. So we're not able to cover every single source of uncertainty for a project. Now, transmission adequacy is something that you normally need to look at when putting a project together. We'll certainly look at transmission constraints during the assessment process, and as Delan outlined, the kind of geographic location of a project compared to constraints may well play into the assessment process, but we can't provide any particular guarantee that supported projects will have access to transmission. And as you know, the WEM's system is security constrained. It's a security constrained economic dispatch system. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We'll go back to Delan for the next one, please. And Delan, the question is, the capacity after 15 years requires a minimum 2 hours considering the degradation battery. Oh, I think does the capacity after 15 years require a minimum 2 hours considering the degradation of the batteries, or can the output megawatts be changed during the process?
Thanks, Fiona. If I interpret the question correctly, the 2-hour duration eligibility criteria applies at the start of the CISA. Projects then, as part of their returnable schedules also provide us with information around their degradation profile over the life of the project. And so we would look at that as part of our merit criteria for modelling how the project changes over its lifespan, and then that then impacts the value of that project over time, which we assess in the process.
Thanks, Dylan. Alison, I think this one is probably a quick and easy one for you. And the question is, have the commercial contracts been issued for review, or will they be?
Sorry, Fiona, had trouble getting off mute. That I'll answer the question as to what I think the question is asking, but the contract has been issued, and then as part of the tender process, people are asked at stage A to provide any proposed departures to the contract. So that is the proponent's way essentially to review the contract. So once we have looked at all of those responses and departures to the contract that people are proposing, we will then issue a revised contract at stage B, and that is the approach that we've taken in the other two tenders that we've run to date. And so that does give all of you proponents and the market to essentially sort of have a look at the contract and check that it is bankable. So we will take those departures into consideration before issuing the revised contract at stage B. Thanks, Fiona.
Thanks, Alice. Thank you so much. We've only got time for a couple more questions, and it looks like we've just got a couple more left, so that's just about perfect timing. For this next one, we'll go to Zoe, and the question is, if a project is receiving government funding, either state or federal by another method, is it still eligible for this project, for this process rather?
Yeah, so in most cases, projects that are receiving government funding will still be eligible for the CIS. The exception is whether the project is receiving government funding that is considered to be revenue underwriting support. So if a project is party to a long-term revenue underwriting agreement with any other government, for which 50% of or more of its nameplate capacity is contracted, or it receives ongoing payments under that revenue under agreement, so we call that revenue support, then that would be, we consider that to be not compatible with receiving CIS support.
Thank you. And I'll get you to keep your camera on because the last two questions are both for you. So the next one is, are projects protected against a fall in capacity credits driven by an increase in the ESROI or ESROD?
Yes. So there's a correction in the underwriting mechanism to correct for any potential changes in the ESROD after a project has been commissioned. So that should equalize out.
Thank you. And the very last question before we wrap up is the 1.1 gigawatt target in terms of nameplate capacity or capacity credit allocation?
So it's in 4-hour equivalent. So I suppose 4,400 gigawatt hours.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So we've just got 5 minutes left, which will be all we've got time for with a quick wrap up. I'll just get the screen shared, please, with the details of what's next. But a quick update, we've actually answered 55 questions in the last hour, so I bet the presenters are all ready for a nice cup of coffee or tea after this. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. As you know, the webinar has been part of the CIS Tender 2 WEM Dispatchable Capacity, and the details of where you can find the tender guidelines are up on the screen. So if you do have any questions about project registrations, please email cis-wem@aemoservices.com.au. And we'll be posting this webinar on the AEMO Services website in the coming days. So please join me in thanking Matt, Alison, Zoe and Dylan and the team for joining us today. And, don't forget to get amongst the tender and, obviously the web addresses are up on the screen there. As I mentioned, the webinar in full will be posted on the AEMO Services website. But for information more generally on the capacity investment scheme, you can visit the DEQ website. Thanks very much for joining us.